If your creative push has helped you, you can help the show by shopping on Amazon.com. All you have to do is head to yourcreativepush.com/Amazon. That will take you right there, and you can shop how you normally would. A small percentage of your purchases will go directly to helping cover the costs of creating, hosting, and maintaining your creative push. And especially with the holidays coming up, you can make a big difference just by buying the things you were going to anyway. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/Amazon, and thank you for thinking of the show and for helping out. Your Creative Push, episode 176.
If you're excitedly scared about doing something, you're probably on the right track.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Will Terry. Will is a freelance illustrator and children's book illustrator who shares his 23 years of experience on his YouTube channel and his blog, where he offers advice, tips and tricks on digital painting, selling work, reps, agents, business, Photoshop, and setting up multiple streams of income. He also co-owns SVS Learn with Your Creative Push alumni Jake Parker and Lee White. And Will, thank you, man, so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Before we get into SVS Learn, as well as your YouTube channel, I was hoping you could kind of give us a brief rundown of your creative career thus far.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Of course.
So just to condense, I was one of those kids who did very poorly in school. So I felt like there weren't very many options for me. I thought I was destined for a manual labor job, which I did one right out of high school and hated it, which actually sent me to college in pursuit of something better. And because I struggled so much with academic subjects, I've got a mild dyslexia. My parents said, well, pad your grades with art classes, because you do good in art classes. So I never really planned on making art a career because I thought I'd starve. I kind of bought into that idea that if you do art, you'll starve. Mm-hmm. Anything creative. Fast forward, I just kind of stumbled into it, and I started doing editorial work in Washington, D.C., sending my portfolio out. That's how I got started, and worked for magazines and newspapers. Then I started working for advertising clients and started actually making a really good living in the late 90s and early 2000s, to where I thought there's no way I never thought I would ever make the kind of money I was making back then. Then things started to change with advertising and editorial kind of drying up. And at that time I was making a shift towards children's books. I was forcing the other client work, but my real passion I found was in telling a story, and telling a story I hate to say it, but in a cute way.
Right.
And I think it probably had to do with the fact that my wife and I were starting a family, and the first children's book that I was ever offered to do, I turned down 3 times because it's like, I don't do children's books, and then I ended up saying yes because they increased the time, the deadline, and it ended up being, out of the 30 books that I've done, it has sold the best. The one that I turned down 3 times. So anyway, that's kind of how I got started.
And so what was it, aside from getting more time, what was it that kind of made you say, okay, maybe I could do this children's book thing?
That was actually it. It was just the extra time. And my rep was going, these books actually do well. It was one of those step into reading books where the kids have to buy book. They bring that little tract home to their parents and say, I'm supposed to buy books. And
right.
And they sell hundreds of thousands of those books. And so, and I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And the royalty checks just never stopped coming from that first early book. So, but then doing it, it really kind of changed my mind, because it really was fun telling a story. And again, the fact that when I got the book, we could read it to our kid. At the time we had 1 boy, now we have 3. But over time, it just became a natural fit. And I realized that I had been, the junior high kid in me wanted to do skulls and bad guys. And, I think for a lot of guys, it's like, because I teach at UVU out here. I teach art classes, and I'll talk to my students, and they're in the same mindset. They're like, why would I ever want to do a children's book? And I'm like, yeah, you might someday. You never know,
Right. And when you do it, you might not, in fact, starve, as you said.
That's right.
Well, I think a lot of people do struggle with that, and sometimes the other way as well. Like, you have this kind of like the skulls type of thing, or you have this like kind of dark thing inside of you, and you're almost embarrassed, or you're like afraid to like, show it to your mother. You're afraid what people will think about you. And I think it does go the other way too, especially for guys to, like, you hate saying that you do cute things, but at the same time, it's something that's kind of inside of you.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, when you created that book, and when you still create, children's stuff, do you do it with your sons in mind, like something that they would enjoy, or do you do something that Will Terry would enjoy?
And that's a really good question. So I used to do it for my audience. Then over time, I came to realize I have to please myself first. And so my youngest is now 17. And my oldest is 26, so I'm definitely not doing it for them. There was a point where I remember my this was quite a few years ago, but my two younger boys came in, and they were late, like 6th grade, 7th, 8th grade kind of age, and they came in with their friends, and they're kind of showing the house, and they're like, yeah, I'm in here working, and they're like, yeah, that's my dad in there. He does illustrations. He does cute stuff for little kids, like. Like not for us,
Right.
And that was the point where I realized, okay, they're definitely not my audience anymore. But you, as an artist, I really believe that it has to be a selfish pursuit, because if you make art that makes you happy, there are other people like you out there that will appreciate it. If you try to make art for someone else in mind and try to please someone else, from my experience, you'll usually fall short. You'll usually make compromises or make the wrong guesses, the wrong decisions, and then people won't respond to it like you thought. I think if you see all the best art that's ever been created, including, even like cell phones and like Apple products. I mean, like Wozniak and Jobs, they weren't making it for someone else. They were tinkering for their own pleasure and having fun, and they figured out a way to monetize it, but it was their own hobby, their own pursuit. So I think that's really the only way to be successful, is to not even, when I have a client, and I just finished a children's book last week for Penguin Random House, and I always get into the mindset of, you're hiring me to illustrate this story. It was the author. Is actually Marjorie Kyler, who was the editor that was on The Apprentice way back when, on one of those seasons. She's a fairly famous author, and I have to think, you wrote the book, but this is not your art. The publisher bought the book, but this is not their book either. It's our book, and the art is mine, and I'm going to make the art the way that I see it. Definitely take a lot of input. And in fact, the editor has a lot to do. I had great editors and I had great art directors, and they made changes. They made suggestions that definitely made the book better. There were a few that I didn't really jive with that much, but it's always a give and take. But beyond that, there's so much creative freedom like there were spreads in there that the text was very vague. And so that, I asked you, like, do you have any illustrator notes? No, this is totally up to you. So the cool thing is I can just kind of get into it and see what I see. And I actually channeled the final scene. I actually channeled P.D. Eastman. If anybody has seen the book Go Dog Go, that was a book that I had from my childhood. And I used to stare at that final scene at the end where the dogs are up in the tree having a party, and there's no words really. It's just this huge party scene. And so I thought, well, if they're not going to give me any direction, that's exactly what this last spread in the book needs. And I sent them a note saying, hey, I sent them the picture from P.D. Eastman's book, Go Dog Go. And I said, this is what the last scene, this is my homage to that. And they loved it, so. That's
one of my favorite books growing up. I think that's the reason I love dogs so much. I love that one. But you know what? You're right. Like, and you got to trust that they asked you to do it for a reason. And there's so many, if you have the audience in mind, there's so many people with so many diverse kind of tastes that if you think about that, it will just drive you crazy and you won't be able to, really get something that you would like out.
That's right.
I've heard you talk about this before and you kind of mentioned it in your little bio, but like about visual learners and how sometimes, people have different learning styles growing up. And I think that some people do kind of get left by the wayside. As I think a lot of people listening now could probably relate to that too. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And when I was in school, I didn't know that I had dyslexia. I didn't know that I had a real problem with attention. I mean, today I would have definitely been diagnosed with ADD. Mm-hmm. I would just, the teacher's voice would just get real distant and I would be looking out the window or doing something else. And I was always behind and the teacher was always trying to snap me back in. And my parents had me tested to try to figure out what was wrong with me. And, they were both, my dad was working on his PhD at the time. My mom got her master's degree. My oldest sister did extremely well in school. When it was report card day, I could never hide my report card because she would always come running home. Look what I got, straight A's again, And
oh no.
But yeah, and I have students that I used to teach near Fresno in a high school out there, art, and I had a lot of students that were just like me. I don't want to get political, but I do feel like that there's a problem with our educational system where it really only rewards a certain type of learner. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just a product of kind of the evolution of education. I think we'll definitely move to a place where we're addressing that. And it's going to be more expensive to teach to these different styles. My wife, when it was funny because she did really well in school, and in seeing me, and she was a special ed teacher, and she said, wow, I never realized that I always thought that the kids that weren't doing well in school were just lazy. Mm-hmm. I always thought that the kids that were getting bad report cards just didn't care. I didn't realize that that you could actually be intelligent and not good at auditory learning.
Right.
And being married to me, she's like, wow, you don't. So I never look at street signs. I always look at landmarks. So I can find my way around wherever we are better than she can, because I'm like, no, we turned at this rock here, and then there was this crazy looking tree, and then here we are. She's like, and so anyway, there are a lot of different types of people in the world, and I think that one tragedy that comes of this is that you have a lot of really, really creative people in the world, and they feel like they are not as intelligent. And so a lot of times I wonder, do they go into careers that they feel are more suited to them, like manual labor situations, simply because they just felt like they couldn't compete on a college level. And the world is screaming for creative people. I mean, that's especially now that here in the US, we're not huge into manufacturing anymore. Our real export is intellectual property, and everything that we want to have, everything that we want to buy, everything in our homes, everything that we wear, everything that, the things that we eat has all been touched by a creative person. And yet we don't really foster that in school. And so anyway, that's the kind of that could go off into a whole nother tangent.
Well, no, I think you're totally right. And I think that we need to start investing more in exactly what you're talking about, because anything that you look at around you is from something creative. Somebody thought of an idea and created it, or helped to create it, or started the process of creating it. Do you find that still affects you in your work today?
I feel very fortunate because through becoming an illustrator, I've gotten a lot of self-esteem from the fact that I've worked for a lot of big companies. And, my family, who thought, gee, what's he going to do? What's wrong with him? Even I find out later from friends, my friends' parents thought that I was going to be a loser. Like, oh, and by the way, my parents, my mom says hi. By the way, she always thought you were going to turn out to be a loser, Anyway, yeah, I know. So being able to make a career out of it has, given me my self-esteem. But I know a lot of adults that, they're like, well, I used to draw when I was a kid, and, and they're not happy with their life choices for careers and things like that, and what they're doing right now. And I always wonder, what if they had been encouraged to do more of that? Would they be in a different place right now? I don't feel like it affects me, other than I still feel like I have somewhat of a chip on my shoulder. So, if someone were to say, well, only smart people, or the smartest people are the ones that have gone to college, I'm very quick to point out that college gives you knowledge, but it doesn't make you smarter. Mm-hmm. But other than that, no, I feel I'm always very willing to discuss that topic, though, because I just feel so bad. I have parents, because of my YouTube channel and my Facebook presence and the social media presence. I have a lot of parents that will privately contact me and go, I have a kid that sounds like he had the exact same, like he's going through the exact same thing that you did. What do I do? Cause he's doing horrible in public school right now. And I really don't have good answers. I mean, short of, homeschooling or, private school, which is very expensive, there really aren't a lot of options other than my basic advice is to encourage them and don't make them feel like they're second-class citizens because they do poorly in math. I mean, how many of us rely on the math that we learned even in college on a daily basis? Most of us don't.
Right. So
there's no reason to make a kid feel bad for that. I mean, like, definitely not. I wouldn't give kids a pass for saying, you don't have to try, you don't have to struggle. But at the same time, just understanding that we all have different gifts, and we need to be appreciated for those gifts that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is no perfect advice for, every situation's different, but yeah, finding that, a different, not necessarily a way out of the system that's perhaps failing them, but finding, other ways to learn and to kind of foster these other abilities that they might have, like SVS Learn. So could you talk about that a little bit? Because we had Jake Parker on episode 79, and he talked about that a little bit. Can you talk about SVS Learn?
Yeah, so that actually, the genesis of that it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. In a nutshell, my wife got an autoimmune disease and she lost her job teaching because she just couldn't go any further. And we were really strapped for money because we had grown to rely on both of our incomes. And so going through that hardship, I really had to look for other ways to generate income. And so I started, one of my students at UVU said, you're doing these speed paintings and putting them on YouTube, but I can't really learn from that. They're neat to see. What if you slowed it down and talked over it? And it was like, and then he says, in the same email, he says, I'd pay money for that. And it was like a light bulb went off. And so I started making video tutorials and putting them on my willterry.com site. And they sold amazingly well. I was early on online tutorials, and not the earliest, but early enough that we sold a ton of those. And then that led to working on another company with another partner, and things went well, but there were problems. And so I ended up selling my interest in that back to him. And then that was when I partnered with Jake and said, hey, I think there's something here that we could do. And we could use a platform like GoToMeeting, and we can teach live, and then we can take those recorded versions and sell them for a much lower cost. But we can really help students live online now that we both have Cintiq monitors, a graphics tablet monitor that you can draw on. And so we could take our students' work. At the time, I didn't even have this technology at school. You can take someone's artwork and just basically draw right over top of it, kind of like a Madden playbook, right on top of their art, and say, this is where I would have zigged, this is where I would have zagged. And I couldn't even do that at school. Now I use my iPad Pro and down at school and do that and hook it up to the projector. But it gave us the ability to help people all over the world. And I think the biggest advantages are, it's not a replacement for school, for college. We look at it as an enhancement. Some people do use it as a replacement, but I think that the average person really kind of needs the college environment, because most of us need extra motivation, and we need to kind of feel that camaraderie with a group of people that are all doing the same thing to kind of help motivate us. I think people that are really self-motivated can do it without college. But I think the advantages that we have with our online school is, if you're living in a part of the world where you either can't get to school because it's too far or it's too expensive, then we're a really good alternative. If you can get to a school, often they don't have the classes or the teachers that you want to take. And we hire teachers from all over the world. So we try to hire the people that will teach the exact thing that we want, that are the best at doing it. So we're not limited by location. And I think those are probably the biggest advantages. And then the cost, we can get the cost down, because we don't go through any accrediting process. They really are, it's just pay to learn, so we're not beholden to any college system that requires membership and things like that.
Yeah. And I think the other really good point about it is that people can do it at their own pace too. Whereas, with our busy lives, so you have a full-time job, it's hard to, you have to schedule things around, a college offering a course at, 2 p.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can kind of do it at your own pace, but the trick is to have that kind of self-motivation to continue to push yourself. That's
right. And ironically, I didn't know this when I got into teaching. It was just a kind of a fun thing when we moved back here to Utah. One of my friends at UVU just said, "Hey, would you like to teach a semester, adjunct?" And I said, "Sure." It sounds like a fun thing to do. And I didn't realize how much I love teaching, number one. But number two, I realized it really makes your art better. When you have to break down a concept to explain it to someone else, you have to learn it better than you did before. And my work got so much better after I started teaching that it's one of the things that I encourage basically every artist to do, is find a way to help other people learn art. There's something about that giving process. It sounds cliche, but you really do get more than you give if you do it right. If your heart's not in it, you really are going to just waste people's time and money. So yeah, I love it. And I'm getting ready to make a class for SVS called Design 50, which is one of the hardest things to do, is to design an image that's extremely complex, yet maintain a real simple composition and focal point. So that's what that class will do. And we offer classes like that are very specific on very specific skills. And then we have some that are more broad, like we have a children's book class from the illustration side. And then we are just finishing a class right now with Ann Whitford Paul, who wrote a book called Writing Picture Books. She's a picture book author, and she's the writing side. So I'm in there helping her in that class. It's the best of both worlds, because I'm getting paid to learn the thing that I've wanted to learn forever. But, we never had a class at our college or at the college that I teach at now that teaches you how to write picture books. And so, yeah, that's why I love it. It's the internet has given us the ability to specialize so much more and to do it more cheaply.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point that shouldn't be lost, is that teaching is like one of the key aspects to like mastering your craft. I've suggested this for artists too, is to do those kind of time-lapse videos you were talking about, to just record yourself as you draw, and then give go over it again and give like a play-by-play and say why you did what you did, and you can really start to understand yourself, and you can actually learn why you did what you did, and that can help you in the future. And you don't even have to post those videos online. You can just do it for yourself, like a little diary entry, and maybe post them online. I think that could definitely help people. But yeah, just to have like a look over of what you did, and you might surprise yourself.
Absolutely.
Now, can you talk about your book, Little, which I think just came out or is about to come out, which isn't a children's book, but it's, you can talk about it.
Yeah. The beginning of that was I went to a few Comic-Con conventions out here at the Salt Lake Comic-Con, a couple years in a row. And a lot of my friends are in animation. A lot of my friends are in illustration, obviously. And some of them were tabling. And then thrown in there were some of my students. And I'm like, oh, you're doing this too. Yeah, make money doing this and having fun. And most of them were doing fan art. And so for a long time, I hated fan art because I didn't really understand it. And I just didn't really get into it. I was like, I just want to do my own things. Right. But it became such a huge thing that it couldn't be ignored. And the more I looked into it, the more I'm like, there's actually some things I would probably have fun doing, redesigning someone else's character. And so, and coming up with a concept and that furthers the story, something that's not in the original IP. So I started doing that just on Sunday afternoons, just for fun. And I started posting them online, and man, some of them got a lot of attention, and the followers started coming on Instagram, and just the excitement. And I really started to get into it to the point where maybe 5 or 6 months down the road, I started thinking, well, maybe I'll just do a Comic-Con the next time it comes around. And I did, and the characters did really well. People bought a lot of them. As I kept going, I thought, well, it'd be nice to have 100 of these. And so then came up with the idea of putting 100 of them in a book, 100 pop culture characters of all different IPs into one book. And my idea was, at first, one of my reservations was, well, if I do fan art, it's not going to look like my children's book stuff. So it's not going to help me get more children's book work. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought it was dumb and I didn't want to do it. And then it hit me one day, just make the characters little, make them as kids, make them cute. And that's kind of where the book Little came from. And again, ironically, the last book that I did, the last children's book I did called Bonaparte, came from Penguin Random House, from an art director who had seen my fan art project and thought that I would be perfect for that children's book. So it's like the tail wagging the dog, it kind of, everything I thought was dumb ended up being everything that was perfect,
Right.
So I launched a Kickstarter, and you can see the Kickstarter if you just type in my name, Will Terry, and then Little. The Kickstarter ended in May or June or something. I can't remember, but it ended this year in the spring. And we just finished fulfillment on the book and printed a lot of extra books to sell at conventions, and have been selling tons of books. In this September at Salt Lake Comic-Con, sold 140 books at that one convention.
Oh, wow.
And they're for sale. We don't have our store up right now. It's a long story, but if anybody wants a book, I would say go look at it first on the Kickstarter to see if it's something that you want. And then if you do, just email me and I can send it to my assistant who sends out books and stuff.
Cool. We'll have that all linked up on the show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/Will Terry. But yeah, it's an awesome book. Again, I don't want to use the word cute, but it's awesome. And I think you bring up a really good point too. It's like, do whatever your heart tells you to do, and then other things will come. Because it doesn't match up with what you're currently doing, and this is for anybody listening, just do it anyway. Create a new identity almost. Just do a second thing, and you never know what opportunities will come from that.
The other thing with that, to go along with that, is if you're excitedly scared about doing something, you're probably on the right track. Because whenever I've felt like, oh, this is going to be awesome, people are going to love this, I'm usually wrong. When I feel like, ooh, this would be a really fun idea, but if I do this and it fails, I'm going to feel horrible. And I've had those failures, but I've also had many successes with that as well. And I think that's the reason you're scared, is because you're onto something that you haven't done, or hasn't been done quite the way that you are planning on doing it. And so you're worried that people are going to say that it's stupid or that it's dumb. And ironically, because hasn't really been done your way, that is probably the reason why it has such a good chance of being successful. Does that sound right? I mean,
Yeah, I've talked about that before. It's like that fear that I've talked about, nervous farts. If it gives you that kind of like nervous energy, like you said, you're onto something. It's like a gauge for what's important to you. And I think that when you have that kind of nervous energy and you let that hold you back, that you let that, make you stop in your tracks and not do it, I think that you will definitely regret not doing that. Like you said, sometimes it won't be perfect and it won't find an audience, but sometimes it really will. And I think either way, you have to kind of get those kinds of things out of you, even if it is just for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing to go along with this idea of, venturing down a road or making a project is, and this is something that I've talked about with other friends in the industry, is that right now we're in a time where the internet has made it possible for people to do all kinds of crazy things in specifically in creating products and selling products online and services online and things like that. And because of that, I feel like there's a lot of competition for the established businesses. So for instance, in the children's book industry, they would have never published my book, Little, because they would worry about copyright infringements and things like that. But also it's not their market. They don't have metrics for those kinds of projects. That's not what they typically do. So they're happy to say no to things that they're not 100% sure about. But that doesn't mean that there's not a market there. Also, because there's so much competition, a lot of businesses that are producing products like Hasbro, I've worked for them a bunch of times, and it seems like they're a lot more selective in the projects they do. They're a lot less willing to try things and fail, which translates to that there's more artists today, and there seems to be fewer opportunities for freelance work than there have been in the past. But there are actually more opportunities for illustrators than there have been in the past, simply because you can go direct to market with your own idea. And that's one of the hardest things for people to understand, is to give yourself permission to actually to wear all the hats and to produce a product instead of waiting to be hired by someone to help them with their dream, is to go out there and make your own dream happen, which is extremely scary. It can be expensive and you can fail miserably, but it's the people that are willing to take those risks that also are the ones that reap the biggest rewards and benefits. And we talk about making products or projects and products versus making portfolios in our school, simply because when you make a product, when you have this project that just you work on yourself, when you start to share that online, it's much more shareable than a portfolio image. Everybody can make a portfolio image, but not everybody is willing to go the distance to make a product. When you make a product, it's more noteworthy, and people tend to share it and like it and comment on it more, which means ultimately there's more chance for art directors' eyes to get on it. And as case in point, it was really neat because I was talking about my little project on my YouTube channel, saying all this and saying, this will create more of an opportunity for me, for an art director to see it and to actually hire me from this. But I had no idea that it would actually happen. And then it did, so that was kind of a cool end of the story. And the book has been well received. And so far it won't be out until next Halloween, because it's a Halloween book. But they liked it so much, they're doing embossing on the cover and things like that. So I'm really excited.
That's awesome. And you're right. I think a lot of people, creative people, kind of assume that their success is when somebody kind of picks them up, like somebody finds them and creates them and puts their book on the shelf, and that is their success. But you're right. Today's technology makes it so that you can be the man yourself, or be the woman yourself. Yeah. You can, as you said, wear all the hats and create this thing out of nothing and put it out there. It is terrifying to do, but I think you're right. You nailed it. You don't need that permission from anybody else.
Yeah. One word of caution that I would put, if anybody is thinking about doing making a product, you really need to test it online. You can test it online for free on social media. And so as you're making it, we're also really engaged as people. We're really into stories, and we care about you as much as we do your product. And so what the mistake that a lot of people make is two mistakes they make. One, they just make a product and go, hey, here's my product. You want to buy it out of the blue. So they didn't take advantage of the story behind the creation of the product. They just went straight to it. And the second mistake people make is not building their network on social media before they have the product. So I'll see people all the time who are basically, they're absentee on social media, which does take time and which you can waste a lot of time doing. But then when they're ready to say, okay, I've got this thing, they don't have anybody that they're talking to, and they start to scramble and panic and try to get other people to share their stuff. And that never works. People should share your project for their own selfish interest of wanting to be the first to show their friends this cool thing that they found. It doesn't really work the other way. And if you can't get traction on social media, even if you don't have a huge following, the cooler your project is, the more other people will share it for you, and it can still have that chance to go viral. And so when I was creating Little, I was sharing every time I do a new image, I would just put it out there on social media, and I wasn't holding anything back, but I was basically telling people, and when I decided to do the book, I was basically said, hey, how many of you would be interested in maybe buying a book of this? And it would look something like this. And I just mocked up a cover, and then I made a grid of 100 because I was doing 100 characters. And I said, a stretch goal for the Kickstarter would be this poster of 100. And I had question marks on all the ones that I hadn't done. And I think at that point I had like 60. So I had like 40 question marks for the new ones to come. And it got people into, who are you going to do next? What other characters are you going to do? And you should do this one. I had tons of suggestions from people, and it actually made it their project as much as it was mine. And so through the whole process, then when I launched the Kickstarter, it just did really well, simply because everybody was already involved. A lot of people were already involved in it.
Right. They're like a part of the tribe.
Right.
I liken it to like finding that band that nobody really knows about, and then they become big and you're almost like pissed off because like, you're like, no, they're my band, right. But yeah, it's true. And I think a lot of people, they want to have that finished product, so they don't put the stuff out because maybe it's a little bit of fear, and maybe it's also a little bit of like, well, like this is a part of like a final project, and I don't want to show like my babies before they're fully developed. But I think that's also another point is, as you're kind of developing, you can see what sticks, what doesn't stick, and you can kind of pivot in that respect with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. There were some characters that I actually eliminated from the book because people didn't like them. You can tell, if you get 400 likes on one and then you get 100 on the next one, or your baseline is idling between 300 and 500 likes, and then you get 100, that you kind of came up with one that people don't care about, or you did it poorly, or there's something wrong with it, right?
No, I think you're right. It's having that kind of litmus test that like you said, a baseline. If something's failing, or if something takes off that you have, like you're like, wow, I can't believe that people love this. Like you definitely have to include that you might not have if you kind of like held your cards and waited to put it in the final product.
Yeah, a lot of people have. There's an example that Seth Godin uses, and I can't remember the name of the company, but they basically, in his book Linchpin, which I highly recommend.
So good.
As well. Yeah. He talks about that company in there that wanted to do home delivery on groceries, and they just didn't do enough testing along the way. So they were so sure in themselves that they spent $1 billion trying to figure out that people don't care about home delivery on groceries. It's funny because people would rather, I feel like more people would default on spending money. It's easier to spend money, even though people don't like wasting money. They'd rather do that than do the hard work of the engagement and finding out the truth as they go. Almost like, I don't know why, but we're all kind of built like that. Finding out the truth all at once at a huge premium is easier to some people than finding out along the way. I don't know.
For free.
Yeah, for free. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's that idea of, being terrified to rip the Band-Aid off and,
Yeah.
and just kind of waiting and waiting and waiting until it's like really stuck on your skin and your hair.
Yeah.
And it really hurts when you do pull it off and it's not right.
Yeah.
But I think that's really good advice. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time, so I really appreciate you coming on the show. Before I let you go, though, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best words of advice and push them to pursue their creative passions.
Yeah. So, okay. So if I were to give if I were to reach through and tap somebody on the shoulder, I'd probably say you're only on this earth for a very short time. And there are things that you have always wanted to do. There are things that you have told yourself you're going to do one day. And unfortunately and sadly for a lot of people, they'll never do it. And that one day will come and you'll hear them say, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. And my advice would be that no one that I know, has just decided to be successful and one day just said, you know what, I'm just going to do this. What successful people in the creative field do, and I'm talking about, and success can be defined in a lot of different ways. I don't mean necessarily monetary. It could just be doing a project or doing something that pleases yourself privately. Or it could be that idea that you had that you really wanted to test out, that you wanted to take into the marketplace. But my advice would be, there's no deadline. There's no time that you have to have this thing finished. So you might as well just do a little bit every day. Even if it's just a tiny little task, even if it's just thinking and writing an idea down, the more that you write down or jot down or put down in some form, in some way. I mean, I carry my phone around and I have, I'll have Google Docs, and whenever I get an idea, I'll put my ideas on one raw idea sheet, but then those ideas that are turning into projects, I'll put those and give them their own document. And if an idea hits me, I don't let it just escape, because those are ideas that you'll lose. At least I do.
Me too.
Yeah. So I'll just put those down, and then I can refer back to them later and go, oh yeah, that's right. I was going to do this. But the successful people are people that this is part of their life. If you are a creative person, you are a creative person, and that creativity is dying to get out. And, that passion, that feeling when you have that itch to do something. And a lot of us make excuses because we're afraid. We're afraid that the thing that we're trying to do isn't going to turn out the way that our vision of it is. And as long as we keep it in the vision mode, we don't have to worry about it failing. Uh-huh. And the thing is, you will be much more fulfilled even if you fail, and fail often and fail a lot, to where you're failing forward. There's a good book called Failing Forward. Uh-huh. I can't remember the name of the author, but that's really, successful people have basically learned that trait is to fail often, fail small, and fail forward. And eventually some of their failures turn into these big successes, and everybody goes, wow, you're just this super successful person. How did you do it? And often they don't even look back and know how they did it. They don't necessarily equate all those failures with successes. But they're there. And that would be my advice, is get busy little bites at a time.
Get busy little bites at a time. Yeah, I was nodding my head in agreement that everything you said. I think it's really important to, be a creative person. Don't be a person that does creative things every once in a while. It's making it part of your life. And of course, I'm a big proponent of plucking those ideas out of the universe, just writing them down so you can at least get them out of your head and go back to them later. But yeah, just writing down everything that comes to your head, and every single day, even if it is just writing stuff down, you are moving forward, or failing forward, but hopefully, moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Will, thank you, man, so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. And you can find Will on his website, willterry.com. Of course, you can go to svslearn.com to check that out. And on YouTube and Instagram, he is Will Terry Art. We'll have everything linked up again at yourcreativepush.com/Will Terry. Will, thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love that conversation with Will, and thank you again to him for coming on the show. There's so many good things in this this conversation that we had, but a couple of points that I just wanted to reiterate. And the first one's about teaching, and I really think that you should consider teaching. And when I say teaching, I don't mean that you have to become an accredited professor at a college. You don't have to create an online course or anything like that, but any opportunity that comes up in your life where somebody expresses interest in what you do and says that they always wanted to do that, or how did you do that, I think you should jump on that opportunity, not only to spread your knowledge and to help other people, because I think that's what we all should be doing, but also you can be selfish about it too, because it will help you to understand why you do the things that you do, and to refine your craft further. Even with podcasting, people have reached out to me and asked me questions about how to get started with a podcast, and I am happy to jump on a call with them, a Skype call, or if I know them in person, an actual phone call, which I don't do too many of these days. But you can never anticipate that kind of other interaction that you're going to get from them, as they kind of not question what you're doing, but ask you questions about why you're doing what you're doing. And instead of saying, well, that's just how I've always done it, you can actually sit there and think about the fact that, oh, actually, that's kind of an antiquated process that I'm doing, and maybe there's actually not a good reason for why I'm doing this. There's just so many unexpected things that can come up by having a conversation with somebody that has lesser knowledge about a certain topic than you do, just as much as there is to speaking with somebody who has so much more knowledge than you, gaining their knowledge. It's one of those cycles that you hear about all the time. You learn and then you teach. You learn and then you teach. And like I said, whenever an opportunity like that comes up where somebody asks you for help, and if they ask you for advice or guidance, jump on that opportunity, not only to help them, but to help yourself. And the second point I wanted to bring up was this idea of side hustles, or pursuing something not completely in line with your creative hobby, your creative pursuit, your creative career. Will Terry is a professional artist. That's what he does for a living, and he has a standard work that he does that he's built a career from. But I love talking to him about his book, Little, because it was his side project that he did on Sunday afternoons. This thing that he was even hesitant to start because, as he said, he always hated fan art, but then it became this thing that turned into a book with 100 awesomely created redesigns of these awesome characters. And I think it's really cool to compare that to something that you might be considering doing. Whether you're a full-time creative person making money off of your skills, or you're somebody that has a completely different career like me, to find that time to tinker and to try new things out. Because like we said, you never know where it will lead. And you can't be intimidated by that end game because you have no idea what that end game is. And I think Will is an awesome example of this because it was completely different from his normal stuff. Like he said, one of his first reservations was that if he started doing this fan art, it wouldn't look like his children's book stuff, and it wouldn't help him get any more children's book work. And as you heard in the interview, it didn't matter because it still led to him getting more children's book work anyway. So you have to shut your own inner critic up and stop trying to answer all of those unanswerable questions. Just try it out. Have fun and do those ideas that keep tickling your brain, and don't even worry about where it's going to lead. You're just going to drive yourself crazy. We all have been there. We've all done it. But just stop listening to all these questions about, well, why am I going to waste an hour doing this tonight? Shut up. Just stop listening to that voice. Just do it. Just spend an hour and make it fun. Make it a thing that's enjoyable to you. It doesn't matter where it's going to lead, and it's going to lead somewhere that you didn't expect anyway. So stop thinking about it and just get back to your creative passion. That's what it is all about. So hopefully this episode was enough to inspire you to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Thursday if you need the push again. I love you all, and we will see you then. Go get some amazing work done, people. I love you. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.
You get 400 likes on one, and then you get 100 on the next one, or your baseline is idling between 300 and 500 likes, and then you get 100. You know that you kind of came up with one that people don't care about, or you did it poorly, or there's something wrong with it, right? So
sorry, I had to grab the dog.
Oh,
she's wearing a Chewbacca outfit right now.
Oh, I heard something. I didn't know if that was like, wow.
Amazing point, Will. Sorry.